Alright, today we are going to talk about composition. And composition is essentially the arrangement of specific and proportional relationship between objects of form. And this form is, in our point of contention, is a 2D piece of paper. So, with that, what does the composition do? Composition basically allows us to create a focal point, create something that we want our audience to look at. In many cases, there's 3 different types of composition. 1 is linear or line, 2 is value, and 3 is color. So in this, we would have our paper, and in line, we would use the line to draw and focus to a specific area. This line basically is like a path or a road, and with that, we essentially move forward and create an endpoint, a focal point. And so with that house in the background would be our focal point, and that line would drive us to the focal point. We can do this in several different areas. For example, if you have a cloud in the sky, that cloud and the sky would create a line in imaginary tone. It's not necessarily a physical line like a path, but it would be a line that would draw us to keep looking at that house. Now with that, there is a lot of different things that you can do to continually draw a line and create an idea of focal. So here we drew a horizon, and that horizon intersects with the house, which now creates a idea of looking towards that. We can continue this further by creating some clouds, and those clouds basically lead us to the house. They lead us directionally like this to the house, and that is essentially what line is. Now line has several different ways to do this. You can create lines using the rule of thirds, and the rule of thirds is essentially a division of the paper into 3 even parts, and along those parts you either going to put the line work, so it would either focal along the horizon or the vertical lines, or along one of the points. Now with that, we can also do other things like S composition, dynamic composition. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but essentially what you're trying to do with line is you're trying to draw the eye. My focal point is a person fighting, and I have that sketch of a person here. So this is the person fighting. The line is then the flow of the person, the flow of the arm and the sword, the flow of the body and the spine, and even potentially the... Now with value is a little bit different. Value works on a structure of grayscale. Consider multiple values from white to black. So value, the way that works, is essentially taking a large portion of your structure, so in this case would be a dark tone, and you would contrast it with a light value. Something like that. And that light value creates a aspect that allows us to draw our eye to that value. So with that idea, you can then create more conceptual ideas using layers of value. So essentially what we're doing is we are drawing a lot of different tones. So if I create a landscape with a dark sky, and then I would create a house, and then a linear path, that now creates a value or composition. Okay, that is another way to do things very easily. And finally, there's color, and color is kind of similar to value, except you're using contrasting colors to create value structure. So in this case, if I choose a green, like so, and then I use the contrasting value of, say, red, that is going to draw the eye. That bright color creates a value system that allows me to look at that. Now, one of the big things to understand about this is that contrasting values, especially in color, of saturation and desaturation. So for example, something like this is really hard to look at because the green is saturated and the red is full saturated. But if I take that same green and I desaturate it like so, and then I take that red and create a saturated version of that, it basically creates more contrast. And that is what we're looking at. We're looking at contrast in not only value, but also color. So let's look at this picture. This picture is a Athenian Acropolis. And so let's look at how line, color, and value kind of work. So from a line structure, the line here goes in a lot of different ways. So for example, I'm just going to use this green line, and the green line allows us to basically lead our eye up to the castle. So they do this in several different formats. So you can see the mountains, you can even see the clouds point to the linear structure of this castle. So that draws me to my focal point of the temple, all right? From a value standpoint, if you add a desaturation or a black and white filter on there, you'll notice that a lot of the areas here, and this is where I will draw some notes. So a lot of the areas here, this is all very dark tone. So this is your foreground and it limits your dark tone. And as far as the light tones, it gets lighter and lighter as it goes towards the castle. Your lightest tones are right here, which allow you to draw your eye. And then finally, from a color standpoint, we're using cool colors surrounded by warm colors to basically draw the eye. So for example, here we are using a nice cool white, and then we are going to warm and saturated colors here. And then even the sky is a slightly saturated blue, a lot more saturated than this tone here. And then finally, this is the darkest tones here, and they are desaturated. So it is going from desaturated to saturated to desaturated. And the color and the value are all leading me towards that aspect. Here's the intervention of the Sabine women. This is a very complex, so for example, when we look at it from a linear structure, we have a lot of different things basically kind of pushing us towards the center. So for example, if we look at the value structure here, or the linear structure here, the spears are basically leading us here. The character pointing is leading us here. The legs are leading us up to this main character. And then even here is kind of leading us up to this character. That hand is drawing us up and moving us towards us. Not only that, but every character is looking at this woman. I'll change the color here. This character is looking this way. This character is looking this way. This is looking this way. Even the little baby is looking here. This woman is looking here. And so that is all leading us to our focal area. Next, look at value. And value, again, adding a black and white feature here. So in this structure, the black and white feature allows us to create certain highlights. And in those highlights, this area right here is probably the lightest of everything. After that is a darker value. So even if we look at the value structure, and I'm going to use the color picker here to kind of demonstrate here. So that's almost purely white. But if you look at the horse here, it is about 20% darker. And then finally, when we look at color, the lack of color here is pushing the linear value, or pushing the value of this white to be the most important. Everything else is either browns or blues or even some greens. And the lack of color here is basically creating a focal point. And so that is really quick ideas on how to look at composition. Now, when you're doing your own composition, these are the things that you can ask yourself. So I hope that helps you out. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.